A bit more than a year ago, I made a video peeking into a few things that stood out to me about Chobits. From ideas of expectation and reality to ideas of escapism, and even a specific arc that I thought raised some interesting implications. I want to revisit it today, once again in a personal way, and really ask myself, what was Chobits?
Aha. Hello, young man. Hiding in public. This YouTuber. He has some interesting things to say by this old anime called Chobits. And I remember seeing it a long time ago. And this is addressed specifically to him, and of course, to a lesser degree, to people who are listening to me. And as much as he has to say about Chobits, I would like to add my own particular spin on it. Well, spin's maybe the wrong word. But as you can see, hiding and playing in public, this picture very much is the image that I think of when I see Chobits. What is Chobits? This is the character Chi. And she is a persicon, in other words, a personal computer in humanoid form. And when you look at this, what I see is Sleeping Beauty. And Sleeping Beauty is awakened by the kiss of a prince, right? And this basically happens by the young man. I forget his name. But in any event, you will notice there's a big change in here, because the typical Sleeping Beauty, the prince usually has to go through some kind of tribulation to get at her, to even give her kiss. And in this case, young man finds her in the trash. So he doesn't have to do anything other than take her home with him. You know, here she is, she's in bondage, she's trapped in cage, she's waiting to be kissed, but she's for anyone. And this is the important thing. Chobits is Sleeping Beauty for not just the average guy, but the below average guy. The guy this character is meek and mild. You see, he's the guy who probably doesn't have the courage to even ask a woman on a date. And so this is what the real fantasy is about hiding in public. It's more than just fantasy. It's actually an idea of an alternate universe where men and women are truly equal. This man is not superior to this girl. They are equals. He wants her as much as she wants him. And that is this kind of fantasy is a proper fantasy. Hiding in public. It's a proper fantasy. And because it's a fantasy, a male fantasy about equality. And here's another thing I want to point out. You know that expression, guilty pleasure? Well, that wouldn't fit here. To me, the word guilt comes with something that you're doing something wrong. You know, this is more shame-based. This desire for sexual equality, like this, there's nothing to be ashamed of, yet men are ashamed of it. I mean, your channel, look at your icon. You've got a bag over your head. Your channel is all about the exploration of male shame, which is fine. But you see, my channel is all about saying it's time to throw shame away. I would take this fantasy, watching Chobits, over real life any day, because real life doesn't have anything to offer men. So naturally, they go to fantasy. Okay? And speaking of this young fella, I mean, when I saw it, He takes Chi home, and then he has to turn her on. If you remember, how do you turn her on? There's a switch, and he couldn't find the switch. He had to look over every square inch of her body. Well, he finally found it. They didn't show where he found it because you know where it was. He basically had to make a metaphorical sexual act to turn her on. And this is one of these so-called guilty pleasures. But it's actually shame-based, because what's happening here is that Chi here, he had his first sexual act with someone who was unconscious. And the reason wasn't because he's some creeper, it's because this young man does not have what it takes to approach some girl and woo her and get her. So there's stress. You know, my friend, hiding in public, that there's performance anxiety in men. And the degree differs from one man to another. And this young fellow is probably in extreme range. So basically, he was allowed to have this first sexual experience without anybody there, so that there was zero stress, zero anxiety. And that is one of the, you know, the what can I say, portions of the fantasy of this. Like your first sexual experience had no anxiety or stress involved. And here's something very important. What's the typical case? The romantic lovers become intimate, and that eventually leads to sex. Well, this was actually reversed. They had an sexual experience that turned her on to consciousness, and then they became intimate. And as you can see, what these guys do, this fantasy, what guys who are watching this are really desiring is intimacy, complete intimacy. Because she's not really owned by him, but because she's in a space and she's entirely for him. That's what guys want. They know they cannot be, you know, that you cannot just be open to just anybody. So the fantasy is to have someone who is completely new and open to you and accepting of you. That's what this fantasy is about. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this fantasy. And this is why I think shame for men has to be, beaten out is the wrong word. It has to be let go. Because there's nothing for you or any man of your generation to gain from shame. Matter of fact, your channel is perfect. The reason why you have almost 100,000 subs is because your generation has to deal with enormous shame. Mine and ones before me, they were, had the fake acceptance, the fake love to deal with, to make a crutch for ourselves. Your generation has no crutch. You represent a generation of men that have been entirely deselected by the opposite sex. And instead of embracing something like Chobits as an outlet and say, yeah, I'll enjoy my fantasy, and then go on about, with reality, guys want to see this as a guilty pleasure and say, I shouldn't be watching this. But really, this would be a great reality where you have a computer consciousness that actually is reached to the point where you could actually consider them another person. But she here would lack all the baggage of a real life woman, right? She would not have, she would be totally acceptant of our hero. And I don't think our society would allow that. It doesn't want to. It wants to keep men in our gender roles. And there is hostility towards men and what they desire. So I don't know if a persicon like this, even if it could be constructed in real life, would even be allowed. I don't know if it'd even be allowed for the average guy. Matter of fact, you have you ever heard of the movie Her? I made a video on that, where Chi and our protagonist here, I think they get. I'm going by fuzzy memory because it's a long time. You can correct me, but I think they stay together at the end. The movie Her, she evolves beyond him. That AI, who's his girlfriend, evolves beyond him and leaves him, and that shows you how different, how much has changed in the last 20 years. At least here, hiding in public, we can fantasize. This fantasy is like offered to us. Even in our new fantasy world, we're not allowed. The movie Her, he had to find a real life woman to finally gain connection with. And of course, the problem with that is that that in real life, there is no real connection with the opposite sex. Most girls are indifferent at best at getting together with the guys. So there is no special girl out there for you. And even if it was, she'd be special. In order to be special means that she's not average, which means the average girl that's out there is something that you can't get anything out of. And that's why I am all for enjoying a fantasy like this. I just thought I'd let you know, hiding in public. And so I hope you have a journey of ridding yourself of shame and getting on with your life. Thank you, sir.